Okay, my mic is on, so I assume I'm supposed to start. Hey everyone, welcome at my Jenkins configuration as code, automate your automation server presentation. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Ewelina Wilkosz. Here's my GitHub and Twitter handle if you want it for some reason. I'm gonna start with introducing myself. So you know my name already. I'm from Krakow and I worked in a Polish company, but for Ericsson as a software developer for around 6 years. And at some point, we were working with external consultants that were helping us to with the migration from ClearCase to Git. And I remember those consultants, when they were talking to us, they were saying, yeah, so on Thursday, you can call us afternoon. We can have 2 hours for you on Friday. And I was thinking, damn, I want to work like that. So I've decided I don't want to be a software developer anymore. I want to try to work as a consultant. And that's how I ended up in Denmark and later Sweden, where I work as a continuous integration, continuous delivery consultant. If you don't know what it is, it's like more or less a DevOps area. For 2.5 years, more or less, since I started working at Pragma, that's the name of the company, I'm working with Jenkins, and today I will tell you a story about the product I'm very proud of, and well, I hope you'll like what you see. If you have any questions, and I mean, probably most of you already attended some other presentations, so you know the drill. We'll be using Slido to manage questions from you. And at the end of the presentation, if we have time, we'll take care of those questions. So you just have to go to Slido and use the GeeCON 2019 code. So let's start. The configuration as code plugin has been designed as an opinionated way to configure Jenkins based on human-readable declarative configuration files. Really nice. That sounds nice. It's a part of the documentation, but I will elaborate much more about what it means. So today, during those more or less 50 minutes, I will talk about Jenkins configuration as code. I will explain shortly why we decided to try to implement that solution and who are we. When I say we decide or we implement, and how does it work. Then keep your fingers crossed for my live demo, where I will use Docker and I will very briefly explain what's the setup I have for that. It's very simple. I'm not a Docker expert, but it works. And then once we finally successfully spin the Jenkins up, I will show you how Jenkins configuration as code plugin actually works. And then I want to talk for a while about the open source, because the plugin configuration as code, as most of the Jenkins plugins and many other types of software, is an open source project. And this is the first open source project I ever worked with, and I really, really enjoyed it. So I would like to convince you to become contributors, unless you already are. Thank you. So yeah, I will tell you why I believe it's worth being open source contributor, how to start, and is JCask a tool that you could help with. So yeah, JCask. So a long, long time ago, I can still remember, that's a quote from Madonna, how I was taking screenshot of my Jenkins configuration or job configuration whenever I had to change something. Like my first experience with Jenkins that belonged to my customer I was really terrified. I had like a huge amount of screenshots, and those were like very long screenshots. So every time I wanted to change something, I was taking those. And so that's my personal explanation. But, well, it's 2019, and not since that year, like more or less everything is as code. And what I'm talking about here is from my DevOps area of expertise. So we have infrastructure as code, environment as code, architecture as code, or continuous integration tools as code too. And Docker, Kubernetes, Ansible, Terraform are many tools that allows you to manage any of those as code. The one I'm going to talk about today is Jenkins. For those of you, I assume that if you chose this presentation, you know what Jenkins is, so I'm not gonna explain that in details. If you don't know what it is, you're more than welcome to stay and listen to my lame jokes. Jenkins is an automation server, something that can run all the things that you would have a script written for to do it for you. And Jenkins can be installed through native system packages, can be used with Docker, can be run standalone on any machine with the Java runtime environment installed. So you can have Jenkins that you double-click to run. You can have Jenkins that you start up from command line, or I think the most common solution that I see lately is using Docker. But for years, no matter how you were spinning up your Jenkins, it required manual configuration. And by that, I mean something like this, usually, and it depends on the Jenkins version and the amount of plugins you have. There's like a long scroll bar on the right, because this page is quite long, can be quite long. And that's only one of the sub-pages that you can find under Manage Jenkins page. And usually when you start up your Jenkins for the first time, or maybe when your disk crashed and you have to rebuild your Jenkins from scratch, you have to go through setup wizard, create users, install plugins you want, and then configure everything. So Jenkins configuration as code plugin is designed to answer or solve this problem. So you don't have to click in the UI anymore if you don't want it. And there are other benefits that I will explain later. But it's not like we're so brilliant and we figured out there is a need for configuration as code and no one did it before. Of course, people were trying. And there are actually two parts of Jenkins that we should consider. There is an actual Jenkins master that you have to configure with credentials, nodes, and many other things that we, for example, could see on the previous slide. But there is always the part where you actually run your builds or tests. And you can use traditional freestyle jobs, or you can use a little bit more modern pipelines. And both job DSL and Jenkins files are solutions that are present for years already. And I think they are working very well. And for many Jenkins users, they became like a standard. You can't just create your jobs by clicking, and better just have Jenkins file in your repository. So this is covered. But then this whole part is a little bit more tricky. So there is this thing called post-initialization Groovy scripts. And those are scripts written in Groovy that they may look like that. So this is quite I know it's short, but for configuring one thing, it's quite a long piece of code. And if you're a Jenkins administrator, but you're not a software developer, then you might not be super happy that you have to write something like that to have your Jenkins configured as code. And the other disadvantage of those post-initialization Groovy scripts is the fact that they, as the name says, happen after initialization. So you have to restart your Jenkins to actually apply any change in those scripts. So every change in the configuration, if you want to keep it as code, would require you to reload your Jenkins, restart your Jenkins, I'm sorry. There are people that are just backing up their XML files, because most of the Jenkins and jobs configuration is saved in XML files. It's not very easy to edit those files. And there were other approaches, and the one I came across was the one that was created by Pragma, which is Jenkins as code reference. So the first customer I went to, and I was supposed to install, not install, but maintain and upgrade their Jenkins, they were using this Jenkins as code solution. And it's nice, but it relies on those post-initialization Groovy scripts. So there was a nice library of Groovy scripts that someone wrote, and then I was updating those scripts if the customer needed to configure a new plugin or change something. But then it required, again, the restart of Jenkins every time you wanted to apply, and every time I was making change in my fork of the repository I linked here, that is also open source. It wasn't very difficult, but it was a little bit too complicated for a lazy person to push it back to the reference repository, and there were other customers who were using the same solution, and each one of them was developing their own pieces of code for the same problem over and over again. So it wasn't very easy to share the solutions between different customers or users. It's not for customers only. So I really liked this solution. I was happy that I finally don't have to make any take any screenshots, but I've seen there is a field for improvement. So I've decided I want to do something with it, and I wasn't alone. So there was a number of people from Pragma, and they are not all listed here, but they had the biggest impact. Andrei and Alexandra, who were working on this Jenkins as code reference solution mentioned on previous slide, and Mes, a software developer from my company, we've decided that we want to try something new. We want to create a plugin that will be easier to use for anyone, and it will not force you to use Docker because the previous solution relied on Docker. So we want something that don't force you to use Docker. You can have your Jenkins manually installed on a Windows machine and still use configuration as code plugin. And then we figured out that Koske, creator of Jenkins, together with other people from CloudBees. CloudBees is the company that is maintaining Jenkins. Jenkins is still free and open source. So they were working on a similar solution. We forked their repository, and I think they figured it out. They noticed, so we got in touch, and we started working together, which was really, really great for us, because I have experience with customers. I'm not a Java developer. I can read some code, but and I can write some code, but not this crazy Java magic that Nicola does. So they joined the team, and we started working on a solution together. And we presented it, the first official version, at the Jenkins World last year, a little bit less than a year ago. And then it exploded. But until when it was only a small group of us, we could do some kind of happy development. So we had some rules, but it was basically, CA is failing, usual way. I'll just push. And then Nicola broke the CI again by pushing to master. So he's going to fix it, but by pushing directly to master. And it worked for a second, but yeah, after the plugin became much more popular, and people started joining the community and just like developing it with us, it wasn't only a few people from Pragma and few people from CloudBees, so we had to introduce some rules. And I learned a lot when we started working with a bigger group of people I've never met, and I will share some experiences later. But currently, Jenkins configuration as code is maintained and developed purely by an open source community. So how does it work? The input format for Jenkins configuration is YAML. And we had some discussions. Some people wanted JSON, or some people wanted to develop their own language. I really wanted it to be something that most of the people will know, and they will not have to learn anything else. Also, I've just moved to Denmark then, and I couldn't figure out how to make those curly brackets. And then when I finally figured it out, and I got my new MacBook, it was accident. I mean, for some reason, I got one with Swedish keyboard, so it was all over again. So I've decided, no, we're doing something when we have to barely use any brackets. So there are still some curly brackets, but not that much. So we have to prepare a configuration file, and we have to tell Jenkins configuration as code plugin where the configuration file is. When I do my demo, you'll see how you do it. And then whatever you would normally configure under Manage Jenkins, which are like configure system and security, credentials, location of tools, Jenkins configuration as code plugin mostly can handle. When it comes to plugins, we tried to support plugin installation in Jenkins configuration as code, but unfortunately, the update center in Jenkins is a little bit tricky. So we are waiting for someone who will fix it, and then we'll introduce plugin management in the configuration as code plugin too. And we're not just waiting, it's actually happening. This is short information about the open source part. So there's Google Summer of Code project, quite a big project, and Jenkins is part of that project, and there is already a student, I think, interested in implementing the plugin installation manager command line tool. So we hope that after vacation, after summer, we'll have the plugin installation, or we'll try again to introduce it to configuration as code. So that's very short configuration file. If you have your own Jenkins, probably it would be a little bit longer. But it is quite simple. It tries to, you should be able to more or less figure out what each one of those fields does, because they are very similar to what you see in the UI. So we have system message, JCask demo. We have a number of executors. We have SCM checkout directory count and some stuff. This is a way of handling local user, for example. So all you have to do is prepare a configuration file, install the plugin, and you're more or less good. So why I believe it makes sense to use configuration as code? Well, it gives you some safety and traceability if you keep your configuration file, for example, somewhere in Git or any other source control version you're using. It gives you the traceability. So if you use configuration as code and suddenly your Jenkins start behaving in a weird way, you may always go to the repository and check if there was a change lately, and you'll probably see who made the change. And if you don't understand why the change was introduced, you can just check with that person. Speed, of course, configuration as code won't make Jenkins faster, but it will help you to spin it up faster or just clone it faster. If you want your colleague to have Jenkins exactly the way you have, it should be much faster than doing everything manually. And yeah, it's easy to use and reuse, because once you prepare your configuration file for the first time and you want similar, the same, different Jenkins, you have the main structure, you have the template. So you just copy it, make some small or bigger changes, and you're ready to go. We really, when we consider the format of configuration file, I explained some reasons why we went with YAML, but a very important benefit of using YAML is that it's commentable. So the configuration file may be a documentation itself. If you know you're going to share it with someone, or you know you're going to forget why you did what you did, you just put comments in the file and it's there. But yeah, that's a tricky thing with YAML. And usually when I copy YAML from a web page to during my live demo, I mess up the indentations. So that's the tricky part. You have to know the indentations matter. And I don't have this tool yet. This is not a picture I took. This is from Justin. But yeah, well, interesting idea. The main reason for using a plugin would be to have a fully working Jenkins master with no hands-on keyboard and no click in a web UI. And of course, it's not entirely true, because at some point you have to write your configuration file, or at some point you have to run Docker Compose app or something like that. But there are some ways to automate many things. So it's like the minimum of interaction from you required to have your Jenkins up and running, including jobs. And we did not introduce new solution for building jobs, but we support job DSL syntax, so you're ready to go. The trickiest part was to support all the plugins. So the solution with Groovy scripts is nice. I like it. It is relatively simple, but each plugin you want to support, you have to write a dedicated piece of code for that. And you may not want to do it all the time. So we wanted to the plugin to automatically detect what can be configured for each installed plugin. Some plugins work just like that, but some require some minor, or older plugins with a weird architecture require some major changes. And documentation and validation tools are generated on the fly for your specific Jenkins instance. It works similar to Job DSL plugin. If you're using Job DSL plugin, you may know that you can access your local API viewer, and then you have only configuration, only snippets of code for the plugins you have installed. So in general, Jenkins configuration as code plugin just takes your Jenkins master, the version of the core you're using, and the plugins you have installed, and it creates a data model. The data model drives YAML parser and is used to generate documentation and schema validator in a JSON format, I think. So yeah, I said we wanted to automatically detect what can be configured in each plugin that we're using, but of course, we did not create artificial intelligence that will just figure it out. So we rely on some design rules. Those are not design rules introduced by us. Those are some basic design rules that are described in the linked document. But in short, the plugin relies on data binding mechanism and components that directly parse stapler request or JSON object can't be introspected. So if after the presentation you'll be convinced that you'd like to try to help us with fixing some of the plugins, you can always go to, sorry, not that one, to the docs folder, where we have a number of markdown files with different information and requirements. Explains in details with some examples what this actually means. So here is like an example of the configure method that is used by many plugin developers, where they get each field separately. We rely on this bind JSON method. So, and I'm not going to go into that in details. I mentioned I'm not a Java developer, so I don't want to pretend that I know it very well. But you can read. So yes, time for a promised demo. And then, is there anyone who would like me to make the font bigger? No, very good. So I mentioned that I will use Docker for my demo, and this is I don't know, I find it very easy and helpful. So I have a very simple Docker file, and the Docker file in the Docker file I say that I want to use latest Jenkins LTS Docker image as a base. I want to disable setup wizard because when I spin up my container, I just want Jenkins to be working, and I want to copy a file from. I copy file here from my local machine to Docker container, and I run install plugins sh script. This is the way how you can install Jenkins plugins if you are using Docker to run it. And the plugins, it's just a text file with the plugin ID, and I always use latest for a demo purpose, but you can put a specific version of the file of the plugin you'd like to have installed. And then install plugins sh script will just install it for you. So that's a Docker file. Then I have Docker Compose that I use because I need some additional things when I spin up my container. I want to define the volume where I will preserve my data. So if I configure some jobs and I have some builds and my container goes down, when it goes up, it still uses the same. When I take it up, it still uses the same volume, so I don't lose my jobs, I don't lose my history or my pipelines. So that's one thing. So and then I map the content of config file. I will show you the config file in a second. I'm sorry, the config folder in this repository. So I map the location of the folder from my local machine to a folder in container. And here in the in line 19, I define an environment variable, cask Jenkins config. And this is the way of telling configuration as code plugin where to look for the configuration files. You can, so I say look in var Jenkins _conf folder, and this folder actually points to the content of the config file in this repository. Config folder, sorry, I don't know why I'm still so focused on a file. You can have one file you can divide your configuration into multiple YAMLs for maintenance purpose. So I have relatively short one where I define some jobs. I define some authorization strategy using global matrix something plugin, and I give the administrator rights to anyone. I'm using Docker secrets. So in Docker Compose, in here, I define 2 secrets, and those secrets are pointing to text files. Those are single-line text files with the password in a clear text. You can use environment variable to pass your secrets, and you can find some nicer and more safer way to keep your secrets, of course, but this is how I do it for now for this demo purpose. I know there are people that are using Vault or other tools that allow you to keep all of your sensitive data, but still you have to pass this initial secret, the password to Vault, for example, to configuration as code somehow. And probably you won't be keeping it in the repository. You could, and in this example, in line 14, I just want my user password to be pass, but that's not what you would do for a system that you want to be secure. So I define those secrets in Docker YAML, and I inform Docker that I want the Jenkins service to be able to use those 2 secrets. And then, so one of them is GitHub, and the other is admin password, admin PW. So here in the configuration file, I just use $sign and curly brackets to reference the secret. And that this is safe to be put in the repository. Yeah, that's more or less, this is a basic setup, but it gives you Jenkins that works. So what I have to do is just run Docker Compose app. And of course, it's already built, and the plugins are downloaded. It was taking some time on this network. So so you have to believe me that it would work from the scratch, even if I haven't downloaded all the images and plugins before. The warnings we've seen are related to build agents, because I defined some fake build agents that I want to connect through SSH, and they don't really exist. But Jenkins is fully up and running, so if I go here, oops. So that's how it looks, normal. The only difference when you use configuration as code is that if you go under Manage Jenkins, you'll see a special configuration as code button. So if I want to make a change, I just go here and take one of the configuration files. Let me open the main web page again. So this is a system message. So I can change a system message and say, hello, GeeCON 2019. I save, and this is the file in a folder that is mapped to the location in a container, so it's readable for the container. So I just go down here to configuration as code, and I reload the existing configuration, and it works. And of course, that's really simple. You'll probably be changing more complicated stuff, but that's how it works. And here, the mentioned documentation and JSON schema are also available. And you get some information about what are the root elements for your YAML and what are the attributes that you can configure. And this is schema that you can attach to, you can use it in one of your IDEs, I guess, to validate the structure of your configuration file before applying it to Jenkins. But if you make a mistake and use an attribute that doesn't exist, like we don't have system message K attribute, and you want to apply the change, so I go back here and apply the change, reload existing configuration, and get, oops, it's not working, but it's only a dry run, so don't freak out. Your Jenkins is perfectly okay. Nothing has changed. I refreshed it. You can see. So it's working. We apply this try run, and if your configuration file is incorrect, you try to configure something that is not configurable, it will give you the nicely looking stack trace, but it won't break your Jenkins. Oops, not here. So yeah. The plugin is still being developed. It provides relatively safe basic functionality, but we're still working on implementing more things. Like, for example, I'd like to just push the change to the YAML file into the repository, and I would like my Jenkins to monitor the repository and download the newest version of configuration file and reapply it, or just use a location from URL. But it is a little bit more challenging. We didn't get that far yet. It's on the list of the features we're trying to implement. So yeah, that's about the demo. It worked really nice. So I'm going to move to open source part. And of course, if you have questions regarding configuration as code, you can use Slido, or we can just chat after the presentation. So yes, let me tell you how to start contributing and why I believe you should start contributing. You could try contribute to open source. So I really believe it's quite obvious. First of all, you learn. You learn a lot. You don't only develop your development skills. If you end up working on a project with skilled people, you learn from them. You also learn project management. You learn how to work in distributed teams. And even if you know those things, you often end up working with people from different cultures, and it's still a new thing. So I find it very, very, very interesting. Also, many of us, many of you probably are using open source. And I work for a huge company right now, and they rely on open source products. So I think it's only fair to give back. And also, the biggest and strongest, the bigger and stronger community, you can hope that the open source product you're using won't simply die. And it, of course, happens with many of them. There are Jenkins plugins that were not updated for 7 years, and no one wants them. But, well, in case of Jenkins, they have a big company behind them, so this one is quite safe. But in general, like, the stronger the community, the better, and the better the products, and they will live longer. Leaving your comfort zone helps you grow, and I don't assume all of you would have to leave your comfort zone to contribute to open source. Maybe some of you just are feel like a fish in the sea when you do that. But I'm pretty sure it's not like that for all of us. So it was really hard for me, and it boosts confidence a lot. And yeah, tackle challenges and have some fun. So it's not your work. You can just pick up an issue and try, and maybe it's super cool troubleshooting, and you're like spending half a night on it, and it I don't know, makes you happy. Or you just don't like it, and it's like, okay, not for me. Next. So that's a nice opportunity to look for nice tasks. Expand your network, of course. You end up working maybe with people that live on another side of the planet. And it's really, for those of you that haven't tried, it's probably much easier than you think. So I ended up working on open source project by accident. It's not like I started a new job and I want to do open source. It wasn't like that. I just wanted to fix the product I was using, and we've decided we're doing it open source, and the people started joining, which was very difficult for me because, as I mentioned at the beginning, or a couple of times, I'm not a Java developer, and then I get to work with those serious and very strict Java developers. They have their requirements and they have their procedures, and the people end up fighting. But it was, in my case, it was always a fight about something, not about people, and by that I mean, like, we were discussing a lot how the issue template or the procedure should look like, if there should be people that are allowed to push to master and things like that. And some people are becoming very emotional about that. But then you just, I don't know, talk about it and learn. And in the end, it wasn't never personal. So yeah, all of those things, like you grow, you learn, you expand your network, and then you kind of took this big step that yeah, moves you forward. At least that's how I see it. So how does it look in the real life? My success and my failure examples. A big part of the configuration as code plugin development is actually fixing other plugins, the plugins that are probably used by many people and that are not working with configuration as code yet because they don't follow those design rules I was showing you or just mentioned. You can have a look after the presentation. And one of the plugins is so-called Mattermost plugin. It's a plugin that I think allows you to send notifications from your Jenkins about like build results or fails to your Mattermost, and it's basically a copy of Slack plugin. So it works. There is a Slack plugin that works for Slack the same way. So it did not work with configuration as code, so I've decided to fix it. So I created a pull request and I fixed it. So there was, I mean, this was one of my first pull requests to a project that I haven't worked with before, and I don't know those people, so I was pretty stressed. And usually, I mean, you get some review, you get some comments, then someone tell you thank you for that, and this is really nice, and then they just released a new version. So I'm like, yes, I did it. So a little bit longer than a week after the new release, a user reported that he cannot change settings. He cannot configure Mattermost plugin in a traditional way. So he goes to he uses UI, he goes to manage Jenkins, configure systems, scrolls down to Mattermost, changes something, save, and it's not saved. So then I freaked out, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm very sorry for the mess, and I'm gonna fix it. So, you know, some coffee, a lot of coffee, talking to people, testing, and the new pull request was ready within a day or the same day even. So I create a new pull request, and then people are testing it, and they release, and at the end it's. Yeah, me sorry for the mess, and they consider this a small issue, not a mess. And I mean, I know it's not software development; it's just, you know, people being nice. But it is an important part of software development process. And having experienced something like that, I'm now a little bit less stressed when I try to implement solutions for another plugin. So, yeah, how do you actually do it? If you want to work on some open source project, you have to find this project somewhere. And GitHub is not the only place where those projects are being hosted, but it's one of the most popular ones. So I do have, yeah. Most of the Jenkins plugins, for example, are being hosted on GitHub under Jenkins project, and I know that there is like publish, and I will tell you later how I know. There is a publish over SSH plugin that is not working with Jenkins yet. So I can just simply go to the plugin. I can fork it. I can fork it. Oh, I forked it already. Okay. Well, I can fork it and then I click something, but I did fork it before. So I have my own version of that repository, and I implement my solutions here, probably somewhere on a branch. So yeah, what's important is like the README file for this plugin is kind of short, and I guess you should assume that they're using Maven to build it. But there is many plugins that, or other products, I mean, you don't have to contribute to Jenkins plugins, of course. Usually, if it's a project that expects contributions from other people, they explain how do you have to configure your system and how do you have to run it to actually be able to check it locally. So you have to find a way to do it. And you implement your solution on a branch, you push your solution to your branch, and usually when you push your solution to your fork, and you go back to this repository, you'll see somewhere that there is a potential pull request because someone pushed to the branch on a fork, or you can see it in your repository that you have created a new branch. So do you want to create a pull request? And then when you create a pull request, you create a pull request towards the main repository for that plugin. And then the story with someone checking, someone releasing, and then someone complaining that something is not working starts. So it is really super simple, assuming you know Git and GitHub. And of course, it's not obligatory for everyone, but I think it's easy to assume that almost all of us do. So yeah, fork it, find a way to build it, and create a pull request. And yeah, hope you find a project with nice people in the community. So at the beginning, I mentioned that Jenkins configuration as code is one of the open source project that if you're interested, you can contribute to it. And it's fairly easy to find a way to help. And I just want to highlight the fact that you don't have to contribute with the source code. You can contribute with testing, you can contribute with reviews, you can contribute with fixing typos, and it's always appreciated. But if you're into some serious coding, you can, for the project you want to contribute to, and I am using configuration as code as an example, you probably will find GitHub issues where you can, yeah, some are using labels, like we have some new features, we have some help wanted, so someone needs help and stuff like that. And well, GitHub is pretty flexible, so there are very different ways of handling issues. There are, I guess, there is a lot of Jenkins plugins that are using Jira. So you would have to create an account on Jenkins Jira to work with them. It's not rocket science, though. We are using some cool GitHub features that one of the contributors introduced. So when you create a new issue, you have to select what kind of issue is that and stuff like that. So you will probably see in details that, yeah, it's a feature request or something. So there are issues, and usually if their issues are here and they are publicly available, you can just grab one, assign yourself to it, and start working on it. So that's one thing. This is mostly help with configuration as code plugin itself. But I mentioned that there are some plugins that have some weird architecture or require some smaller changes. So you would have to go, and there is a link here, find the plugin you'd like to fix. There is a JCAS compatibility label used on Jenkins Jira. So if you search for issues with JCAS compatibility, you get a list of issues with the plugins that, I don't know, what do we have here? The dashboard view or something. So there are things that are waiting to be fixed. And again, anyone can create an account on Jenkins Jira. Anyone can just start working on those. And since I assume most of you are Java developers, then yeah, you're the best audience for that. And in the end, you may want to talk to some people directly because you need some advice or you have some doubts and you need to find some answers. So we and I think a lot of other open source projects, we are using Gitter. Gitter is something that I'm sure you can log in with your GitHub user. And there is a chance you may use users from different services to log into it. But anyway, it's, I can't change the font size, I'm afraid. It doesn't matter what it says here. Most active contributors are usually present here. We have very lively conversations every now and then. People are coming here for help with the configuration. People are coming here and asking about help with implementation. So yeah, it's a way to talk to actual people in real time. Working pretty well, so I encourage you to visit it if you want to do something for JCask. And then, yeah, like there are some plugins that are a little bit more complicated, but there are some like very simple ones. So what was that? Metrics plugin. So this is me fixing it, and that's it. The only thing they were missing was a data bound setter for one parameter. So even if you're not a great experienced Java developer, you read the documentation that I showed you we have in the repository under docs folder. And if you did any development, you can give it a go with some of the plugins. So that's a good start for beginners or students, or I mean, yeah. But if you want to have more fun, I think Gerrit plugin is still waiting to be fixed, and no one wants to do it. So yeah, I think this is all I wanted to tell you, and there is a last slide with the summary of all the links that were up there. So if you, I think I will share the presentation with you somehow, and if you want to find some links, they will be on this one slide. So yeah, questions. I have this thing. So I'm supposed to take the questions from the top? Yeah, thank you for that, because it was very confusing. Is it possible in Jenkins to write job configuration as code? Yes, it is. It's not a part of configuration as code plugin. There are two ways of writing job configuration as code. There is already mentioned by me job DSL plugin, and it allows you to write like, let's go back to my Jenkins. When you can create like a standard freestyle project. And I think Jenkins is like slowly promoting pipelines over that, but this one is still in use. So this is a very traditional way of creating jobs, and job DSL plugins provide some like special syntax for creating exactly what you could create in this UI as a code. And I think somewhere here in my configuration files, I have like a very short piece of, so for example, this is a very short piece of DSL code that actually is used to create a pipeline, so it relies on a Jenkins file that is being kept in this repository. Job DSL, the kind of old school way of creating freestyle jobs as code, or Jenkins file, Jenkins pipelines. Jenkins files, there are two approaches. There is a scripted pipeline and declarative pipeline, and both have advantages and disadvantages. But it is possible to write a job configuration as code. Jenkins slaves configuration is supported by the plugin. So here I actually have, I think it's a SSH slave configuration, and it's like it's a fake one. It doesn't really exist. So if you go to Jenkins, you can see the utility node 1. That's the name of the agent, is not online. We also support JNLP, but I think the easiest way, or I find it very easy, is to use Swarm. So you actually don't configure agent on Jenkins. You just take the build agent. You just tell the build agent, this is where you can find my Jenkins master, connect to it. And I think it requires you to install Swarm plugin, Swarm client plugin on your Jenkins, but it is possible. Well, there is no restart required if you're using Jenkins configuration as code. So when I made a change, for example, I will change the name of the utility node, and I want to apply it. I just go to manage. Sorry, I did not fix system message. and the utility node has a new name. So there is no restart. It works basically the same way it would work if you went to a utility node and you have configure and you change the name here. There is no restart happening in that case. Just because, so yeah, the question, why are the paths in Docker Compose absolute? Just because that's the way I put them. I was creating a hands-on repository, and I wanted to make it like super clear for people who are not very experienced with Jenkins, so just copy and use my solution. So of course they don't have to be absolute. The YAML can be stored in file system. You can also, as a location for the configuration file, use an URL. But if it's a URL that points to a repository that is not available without the password, then of course it won't be readable. And now the time is out, so we have to finish. So thank you very much for listening, and well, enjoy the rest of the conference.